Welcome to Primus Civil Services Academy. I am your CSAT faculty, Sachin Gopanaal. In the previous two videos, we have seen the answers and solutions to the mathematics and reasoning questions of CSAT paper of 25 year. In this video, we will see the answers and solutions to reading comprehension or passage questions of the paper. And as I have said earlier, this year's paper, it was moderate to difficult, the overall level of difficulty. And when it comes to reasoning, it was more or less, it followed the same pattern as the previous 2 years. And when it came to quantitative aptitude or mathematics, it also followed the same pattern as the last 2 to 3 years. And they had just upped the level of difficulty just by one step. But when it came to reading comprehension, they have actually changed the pattern quite a bit. As in, I will tell you how. In the previous years, what had happened was, the option that, the correct option, it would have been taken from the original piece of writing. How? I will tell you how. You know, where do the UPSC paper set take the passage from? The passage is taken from some editorial published in a newspaper or some journal or some academic paper. And where would they take the option from, the correct option? The correct option would also have been taken from, it would have been a sentence in the original piece of writing from where they have taken the passage. But this year, they have taken the passage from the original piece of writing, but they have not taken the option verbatim from the original article. They have changed the options. They have changed the wordings of the sentence in the original article, and then they have made it option here. So that that changes the pattern. So by that logic, by that phenomenon, what has happened is, reading comprehension was the hardest part in this year. Okay, so this was not expected actually. So they have just upped the difficulty level of RC this year. So that makes this one very difficult. Okay, we will start answering the questions one by one now. Okay, question number 1. Okay, I will read the passage first, then I will answer the question. And this was question number 1 as per set A or version A. Maintaining an ecosystem to conserve biodiversity will affect its commercial potential as well as the livelihoods dependent on the ecosystem. Okay, there is also a conflict between using an ecosystem only for livelihoods, for commercial exploitation, or strictly for conservation. Okay, so they are talking about ecosystem and conserving biodiversity and livelihoods dependent on it. Then they are telling us that there is a conflict between ecosystem for livelihood and its commercial exploitation. Deforestation caused due to commercial exploitation will lead to indirect harm like floods, siltation problems, and microclimatic instability, apart from adversely affecting livelihoods dependent on forests. Okay, again they are just reiterating the previous concept with examples. These conflicts are particularly acute in developing countries where the dependence of people on the ecosystem is significant and commercial exploitation has the potential to boost national income. So the entire passage, it talks about what? It talks about conservation of ecosystem and usage or even exploitation of ecosystem for the commercial purposes. So in developing countries, there is a conflict between them. Now conservation of ecosystem or conservation of biodiversity is also required, but commercial usage of ecosystem, it is also required. So there is a conflict between them. That is the whole thing about the passage. Okay, let us try to answer the question now. Which one of the following statements best reflects the critical message conveyed by the author of the passage? Option A, conservation of biodiversity is not an issue to be worried about when some people depend on ecosystem for their livelihoods. Okay, now this option A, what it does is, it does not take conservation of biodiversity very seriously, but the passage, it takes a serious note about conservation of biodiversity as well as people's livelihood. For that reason, we will reject option A. Option B, commercial exploitation of forests goes against fundamental rights of the people dependent on forests for food and shelter. Now this one takes commercial exploitation to a very extreme level of negative thing, but the passage does not portray it or look at it as negatively as shown in option B. because the passage tries to balance between two things: conservation of biodiversity and exploitation of ecosystem and biodiversity for commercial purposes. So it tries to balance between them. But option B, it completely rejects commercial exploitation. For that, we will reject option B. Option C, sustenance of livelihood and degradation of ecosystem while being together can exacerbate one another, leading to conflict and imbalance. Now here, this is a balancing statement. They are talking about sustenance of livelihood, also degradation of ecosystem, and they tell that it create conflicts and imbalance. This option very much agrees with the passage, so we will keep it under consideration, but we will not mark it as a correct answer unless we have rejected all the options. So we are left with option D. Let us take a look at it. Commercial exploitation of ecosystems should be completely stopped. Again, no. This one, it does not value commercial exploitation at all. So this is also rejected. We are left with option C, which is the correct answer. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. Question number 2, based on the same passage. With reference to the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. No country needs to depend on ecosystem to boost national income. No, this is wrong, because in the passage, look here, they specifically say that these conflicts are particularly acute in developing countries. So it means that developing countries depend on depend on ecosystem to boost national income. Okay, so statement 1 is rejected. Statement 2, resource-rich countries need to share their resources with those of scant resources so as to prevent degradation of ecosystem. Again, the passage does not talk about international level exchange of materials or ecosystem. The passage restricts itself to talking about in-house or domestic exploitation of ecosystem and domestic livelihood system. It does not talk about internationally exchanging or trading of materials. So for that reason, this is irrelevant statement. So statement 2, we can reject it right away. So our answer will be, which of the above assumptions is/are valid? 1 only, 2 only, both 1 and 2, neither 1 nor 2. The answer is neither 1 nor 2. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. Question number 3. The history of renewable energy suggests that there is a steep learning curve, meaning that as more is produced, costs fall rapidly because of economies of scale and learning by doing. Okay, this passage talks about renewable energy and steep learning curve. That is, it talks about, it tells us that for us to adopt renewable energy, there is a steep learning curve. So it means that we need to put some effort and time to learn it, and costs fall rapidly because of economies of scale. What is economies of scale? When you produce more goods, because of the sheer volume of it, there will be a reduction in the price and there will be more purchasing of that this thing. So that is the crux of economies of scale. So this sentence, it talks about renewable energy and we getting better at using renewable energy by learning and by economies of scale. That is, by learning and by doing, that is producing, we will get at using renewable energy. That is what the first sentence talks about. The firm's green innovation is path dependent. The more a firm does, the more it is likely to do it in the future. So the likely the firm is to take up green energy adaptation today, the likely it is to follow that path in the future also. The strongest evidence for this is the collapse in the price of solar energy, which became 90% cheaper during the 2010s, repeatedly beating forecasts. So they give an example, which is solar energy. Moving early and gradually gives economies more time to adjust, allowing them to reap the benefits of path-dependent green investment without much disruption. So they ask us to move early, that is, go towards renewable energy as early as possible. A late, more chaotic transition is costlier. So they warn us that if we did not get there earlier, we will be forced to do transition on later date, but it would be more chaotic. Okay, let us take a look at the question. Which one of the following statements best reflects the central idea of the passage? Option A. Economies of scale is essential for transition to green growth. Okay, this might be an answer. Okay, we will keep it under consideration. We are unable to reject it outrightly, so we'll look at the next option. Modern technological progress is intensely linked to path dependent innovations. No, the passage is not talking about technological progress, it is talking about green energy or renewable energy. So we reject option B. Option C. Countries with large economies are in a better position to adopt green technologies. No, it does not talk about large economy or small economy. It only talks about learning curve and economies of scale. Okay. Timing plays a crucial role in the case of a green technology development. Yes. Now, this because they say that they are moving early and late. So they ask us to move early and they warn us about moving late. For that reason, we can say that timing plays a crucial role. Okay. So now, option A and D, we have a conflict between them. Look at option A. Economies of scale is essential for transition to green growth. Now, economies of scale, it is not essential, it is only beneficial. See here, the history of renewable energy suggests that there is a steep learning curve, meaning that the more is produced, the cost falls rapidly because of economies of scale. So, economies of scale, it is beneficial for transition to green growth. It is not essential. So, yes, it is very important, but by essential, it is not mandatorily needed. It just makes things easier because you can do another way also, a late, more chaotic transition. That is also an option. So, option A, we can reject it. Option D, we do not have any reason to reject it. So, our answer will be option D. Okay, we'll go further now. Question 4. Okay. With reference to the above passage, following assumptions have been made. Path-dependent green investments will eventually most likely benefit growth as well as public finances in a country like India. Okay. Now, yes, there is no mention of India there, but path-dependent green investments will eventually most likely benefit growth. That part is true, and we are talking about assumption. So, assumption is something that the author of the passage seems to be believing to be true. Now, does the author believe that it will enhance or it will benefit public finances in India? Yes, because he is talking so much about this thing, green energy, and he is talking specifically about firms because he talks about solar energy. So, it means that he is talking about industries. So, assumption 1, it is valid. Next, assumption 2, if other green technologies follow the same pattern as that of solar energy, there will most likely be easy green transition. Yes, again, solar energy is used as an example. It means that the author seems to believe that just like solar energy, other industries also can do the transition successful if they follow the same pattern. So, both statement 1 and statement 2, they are valid assumptions. So, what will be our answer? Our answer will be option C, both 1 and 2. Okay. We'll go to the next one. Question number 11. Each state in India faces a distinctive set of challenges regarding the impact of warming, but also offers its own set of opportunities for reducing emissions depending on its natural resources. Now, which warming are they talking about? This is global warming. Okay. Each state in India faces a distinctive set of challenges regarding impact of warming, but also offers its own set of opportunities for reducing emissions depending on its natural resources. So, they tell us that each state of India, it has its own challenges, but it also has its own opportunities. For example, coastal states need to take action to protect their shores from sea level rise. Yes, that is their problem, coastal states problem. Then districts that are drier need to prepare for variable monsoon participation. So, that is their problem. Himalayan regions have their own unique challenges, and selected parts of peninsular India and offshore areas offer great opportunities for harnessing wind power. Now, they talk about challenges of Himalayan region and they talk about opportunities in offshore areas. Okay, so they are just giving examples here. These various aspects need to be considered for developing a clear and sustainable goals for the future. Here they talk about developing goals. Okay, now Let us take a look at the question. Which one of the following statements best reflects the most logical, rational and pragmatic message conveyed by the author of the passage? The mitigation and adaptation strategies to tackle the climate change is essentially the responsibility of each state. No, they are not. The passage is not putting all the responsibility on the states. It can be taken by the central union government also. The passage does not put the responsibility on any one person, okay, or sorry, any one body, okay. Statement 2. India is too diverse to implement any effective strategy or program to address or tackle climate change. No, this thing, it is talking very negatively about the challenge, but this passage, it talks about challenges as well as unique opportunities or distinct opportunities. So the tone of this sentence does not match the tone of the passage, so we will reject option B. Next, we'll go to option C. It is basically the responsibility of the union government to implement climate action plans and ensure net zero emissions. Again, we will reject option C for the same reason that we rejected option A. This one puts all the responsibility on the states. This one puts the responsibility all on the union government. But the passage does not put responsibility on any one body. So all the three are rejected. So option D should be our answer. Let us take a look at it. India needs to formulate effective climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies at state or region level. Yes, this is what the passage actually talks about. So option D will be our answer. Okay. Let us go to the next question. Question 12. With reference to the above passage, the same passage, the following assumptions have been made. Green energy production can be linked to or integrated with climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies. Yes, because this statement, it matches both opportunity and challenge, and it is given here where offshore areas offer great opportunities for harnessing wind power. So they are matching challenges as well as opportunities when it comes to climate change problems. This statement, it talks specifically about that. So this is a valid assumption. Statement 2. Effects of climate change are much more severe in coastal and mountain regions. No. The passage only tells us that each region has its own unique problem, but it does not say that one of the region has more problem and the other has less problem. That is not what the passage says. So we will reject statement 2. So our answer will be option A, 1 only. Okay. We will go to the next question now. Question number 13. Okay. If the social inequality is the most acutely felt social problem in India, insecurity more than poverty is the most acutely felt economic problem. Okay. Now this passage talks about social inequality and economic insecurity. Okay. Now social inequality is the most felt social problem and the insecurity is the most felt economic problem. Besides those below the official poverty line, even those over the poverty line are subject to multiple economic insecurities of various kinds due to wealth and or health risks, market fluctuations and job related uncertainties. So they talk about even those people above the poverty line, even they are subject to these economic insecurities. Many government policies are actually intended towards mitigating these insecurities. So here they talk about government policies that are actually intended to mitigate these insecurities. Based on that, we shall take a look at the question now. Okay. Which one of the following statements best reflects the critical message conveyed by the passage? Option A. India's political executive should be aware that poverty and social inequality and the consequent sense of insecurity is the main social problem. Now, here this is a wholesome sentence actually. They talk about poverty, social inequality and insecurity. So this is a good contender to be correct answer, but we will not select one answer until we have rejected the rest. Look at option B. In India, poverty is the primary reason for social inequality and insecurity. No. Again, because poverty is completely different and the passage links somewhere between poverty and insecurity, but social inequality is completely different. For that reason, we will reject option B. Look at option C. Poverty and social inequality are so intricately linked that they pose unmanageable crisis for India. No. Unmanageable crisis? No. They only tell us that it is a valid challenge, but to say that it is unmanageable crisis? No. Look at option D. insecurity more than poverty is the main economic issue that the government policies must address. Now, this is also valid option, because the sentences, the last sentences, many government policies are actually intended towards mitigating these insecurities. And this one says this, yes, that is what they should be doing. So for that reason, this one, it very much agrees with the passage. But what about this one? Here, India's political executive should be aware that poverty and social inequality and the consequent sense of insecurity is the main social problem. Now, this thing, social inequality is social problem, but poverty and insecurities, they are not social problems, they are economic problems. For that, we will reject option A. So option D will be our answer. Okay. And this is just one observation. They have made a grammatical mistake here. India's political executive should be aware that poverty and social inequality and the consequent sense of insecurity are the main social problems. So that is, or they are actually telling about three things: poverty, social inequality, and the sense of insecurity. But in the end, they have made it here. There are three things, but they have ended the sentence with singular singular pronouns. So for that reason, I think they did not intend to create this option. When it comes to reading comprehension, they first frame the correct option, then they frame wrong three options. So they don't pay so much attention while creating wrong options, but they are very particular and very correct when they are doing the when they are framing the correct option. So option D will be your answer. Okay, let us go further now. Question number 14, based on the same question. With reference to the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. People above the poverty line also are prone to suffer from anxiety about social insecurity. Yes, the passage specifically says that. Yes, eradication of poverty can result in peace and social equality in the country. No. Now, poverty is the economic problem. Social equality is a social concept. So the passage does not equate them to, or it does not link them to. It keeps them separately. Social problems are different, economic problems are different. So statement 2 is not a valid assumption. Our answer will be option A, 1 only. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. I think this is question 21. Okay, one of the dismal realities of the agriculture sector in independent India has been that it never experienced a high growth phase, unlike the non-agricultural economy. So now this passage, this sentence tells us that unlike non-agricultural economy, which saw a high growth phase, agricultural economy never saw such a high growth phase. Okay, so it is distinct. It is making a distinction between agricultural economy and non-agricultural economy. While non-agricultural economy, it saw a high growth phase at one time. Agricultural economy, it never saw a high growth phase. It has been growing very slowly, gradually. The highest decadal growth, a compound annual growth rate or CAGR for agriculture has been 3.5% in the 1980s. So that is how low the growth of agriculture has been. Also, after experiencing a spurt in decadal growth in the 1980s, agricultural growth suffered relative stagnation thereafter. So it grew comparatively well in 1980s, but then it saw stagnation. It did not grow much. This is in sharp contrast to non-agricultural growth, which consistently increased from 1980s to 2000. But what about these things, non-agricultural growth? They have seen consistent growth from 1980s to 2000. Okay. Based on this, let us take a look at the question. Which one of the following statements best reflects the corollary of the above passage? So what is a corollary? A corollary is something that you can frame based on what has been said. A corollary is something like this. If a statement A is true, then statement B has to be true. If I say like that, if I say that if statement A is true, then statement B, as a result of statement A, it also has to be true. Then statement B, it is a corollary of statement A. So that is the basic of corollary. So based on that, we shall answer this question. Look at option A. The benefit of economic reforms percolates down more slowly to the agriculture sector than in other sectors of the economy. Maybe. because they talk about the the lack of growth seen in agriculture when compared to non-agriculture. So this may be the correct answer, but we will not choose it until we have rejected the rest of the options. Option B, for India, green revolution was not as useful as it was expected to be. Now, this passage does not give any credit, or it does not blame green revolution at all. So we will not. So green revolution is not correct answer here. Okay. Then statement option C, India lagged behind other countries in adapting mechanized and modern farming. No, the passage only talks about lack of growth in agriculture sector, but it does not attribute it to green revolution or to mechanized farming or modern farming. Okay, so these two are rejected. Option D, rural to urban migration resulted in the stagnant agriculture sector. Again, all these three, they are giving possible reasons for this, but the passage has not given us any reason. Okay, and they are not corollaries. But look at option A, the benefit of economic reforms percolates more slowly to the agriculture sector than in other sectors of economy. So this one, it talks wholesomely about this passage because it makes a distinction between agriculture sector and other sectors. So now when they tell us that in the 90s and 2000s, this thing saw what non-agriculture sector saw a big growth, but in the 1980s, agriculture sector also showed a bit of growth, but it stagnated later. It means that there was some effort, some reforms in 1980s perhaps, and they helped other sectors, but they did not help agriculture sector as much as they helped other sectors. So option A will be the correct answer here. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. With reference to the above passage, the same passage, the following assumptions have been made. The growing divergence between the fortunes of the agricultural and non-agricultural economy in India could have been reduced or contained by. Okay, so they want us to give us a reason for it. Option 1, adapting large-scale cultivation of commercial crops and viable corporate farming. Okay, now, yes, maybe if large-scale cultivation and commercial crops and viable corporate farming was done, maybe it could have been contained. But the passage does not attribute the lack of growth of agriculture sector to commercial crops or corporate farming. It does not give us any inclination about that at all. So we will reject statement 1. Statement 2, providing free insurance for all crops and heavily subsidizing seeds, fertilizers and electricity and farm machinery at par with developed countries. Again, no. The passage, it does not attribute the lack of growth of agriculture to any this thing at all, to any factor. So these factors, they are being forcefully, it seems as though they are being forcefully it seems as though these two options are being forcefully thrust upon us. So there is no indication about these factors in the original passage. Okay, so for that reason we will reject both these statements and our answer will be option D, neither 1 nor 2. Now this might not be convincing to you, but I will tell you why these are wrong. Now yes, the statement 1 seems true, statement 2 that also seems true. Now the reason for rejecting this, because I myself can make up another 2 reasons like this. I will show you. I will give you just one example. I can give for my third statement this thing, that growing divergence can be reduced by doubling MSPs. Yes, doubling MSPs, that would obviously increase the this thing of farmers, income of farmers. So our agricultural economy, it would grow then. So this way I can make up myself own, I can make my own factors, but the original passage, it does not talk about those factors at all. So for that reason, option D, that is neither 1 nor 2, will be our answer. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. Question number 20. In our country, handlooms are equated with a culture that ensures a continuity of tradition. Okay, so now handlooms are equated with tradition. Okay, now this idea has become part of the public policy framing and provides a legitimate basis for the state to support the sector. Now this phenomenon of treating handlooms as a traditional symbol, it has been incorporated in our policy framing also. But the notion of tradition as a single linear entity is being strongly contested today. Okay. Now there is a challenge to this treatment of tradition as single linear entity. Okay. The narratives dominant in defining culture tradition in a particular way are seen to have emerged as the identities and histories of large sections. Now, this narrative, what narrative? Of defining culture and tradition in a particular way. Yes, that is done in all the countries, in all the cultures. So, narratives in defining culture and tradition in a particular way has been seen as what? It has been seen as history of the large sections, that is the majority. Okay. So, they are telling us that seeing culture or tradition in one way, it is now, these days, it has been seen as the narrative of the larger sections. Okay. That is dominant sections. Okay. The discounted and at times forcibly stifled identities are fighting for their rightful place in history. So, the stifled identities, that is the non-dominant ones, they are fighting for their place in history as well as in a portrayal of tradition and culture. Against this backdrop, when we promote handloom as a traditional industry, it is not surprising that large sections of our population choose to ignore it. So, in this backdrop, when tradition and culture is seen not universal, it is seen as a one-sided narrative. Now, when against this backdrop, when in this background, when the government promotes handloom as traditional industry, large sections of our population will ignore it. They will ignore it. So, the passage tells us that handlooms are being treated as a symbol of tradition, but these days tradition is under challenge. So, for that reason, when we give a symbol of tradition to handloom, it is not very effective. That is what this passage tells. Okay. Which one of the following statements best reflects the most logical and rational message conveyed by the author of the passage? We need to free the handloom industry from the limited narrative linked to preserving cultural heritage. Okay, maybe, yes. Continued state support to the handloom industry ensures the preservation of some of our glorious art forms and old traditions. This may be true, but the passage does not talk about preserving old traditions. It only talks about handlooms being treated as a traditional symbol and the tradition being under challenge. We need to change the narrative of handlooms from from symbol of tradition to something else, maybe a symbol of growth and economy, or just as a normal industry, not a traditional industry. Okay. Option C, household units of the handloom sector should be modernized and made an economically viable organized industry. No, this option does not talk about tradition at all. Option D, handloom products need to be converted to machine-made designer products so as to make them popular. No, option C and D, they do not talk about traditional aspect of the passage talks about rejection of tradition. They do not talk about it. Look at option A. We need to free the handloom industry from the limited narrative linked to preserving cultural heritage. Yes, that is what the passage actually talks about. So, option A will be your answer because it matches readily with the tone of the passage. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. Question 24. With reference to the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. There is no need for the state to be involved in any manner in the handloom sector. There is no need. Now, the passage does not reject the role of state in the handloom sector. It merely tells us that the state's narrative about handloom is not welcome. But it does not reject the involvement of state. It merely tells the path taken by the state for promoting handloom industry, it is not correct. That is what the passage says. But it does not reject the role of state entirely. So, statement 1 is wrong. Statement 2. Handloom products are no longer appealing and attractive in the rapidly changing modern world. Now, the passage does not talk about handloom products. It talks about handloom industry only. What is handloom as an industry? It talks about the this thing side. What side? The passage talks more about the manufacturing side of it, not about the demand side of it. Okay. So, and it does not talk about handloom products being unattractive. It only talks about the narrative of handlooms that being unwelcome or unattractive. So both the statements we can reject them directly. So our answer will be neither 1 nor 2. We'll go to the next question now. Question 31. Okay. In our country, regrettably, teaching and learning for the examination have been our forte, but the demands of society and the future of work require critical and independent thinking. Okay. Learning through doing, asking questions from multiple disciplinary perspectives on the same issue, using evidence for building arguments and reflecting and articulation. So the passage tells us we are good at teaching and learning, but for the new demands of society, we want critical and independent thinking. We need to ask questions, we need to think multidisciplinarily, and we need evidence for our arguments, and we need articulation. Higher education should not either be a mere servant of the government policy or a passive respondent to the public good. So higher education, it should not be dependent on the government policy, or it should not be dependent on public good. Okay. Higher learning is all about how to think rather than what to think. Okay. This is a very interesting sentence. Higher learning is all about how to think rather than what to think. Teaching has to be reinvented. Okay. We need to reinvent teaching. Which one of the following statements best reflects the central idea conveyed by the passage? India does not have enough resources for promoting quality education in its universities. No, it does not talk about resources of education. It merely talks about the process or the style of education. Okay. So statement 2 was B. The institutions of higher learning in the country should not be under the control of the government. Yes, this might be true because that says higher education should not be servant of policy. But that is not the central idea of the passage. Merely because you bring institution out of control of government, you cannot say that there will be an improvement. Okay. So look at statement C. Classroom approach to higher education should be done away with. Yes, this is a very good option. We will keep it under consideration, but we will not mark it as correct until we have rejected the other one. Classroom needs to be reimagined and teaching needs to be reinvented. Now this one also seems very good. We have a conflict between option C and option D. Classroom approach to higher education should be done away with. What is done away with? To do away with is to completely reject something. So classroom approach to higher education should be completely rejected. Now the passage tells us about adopting new ways of teaching, but it does not ask us to completely do away with do away with the classroom approach. We can integrate classroom approach and other approach also. Okay. Look at option D. Classroom needs to be reimagined and teaching needs to be reinvented. Yes, this one is a more rational approach to changing our education system. This one would be a bit more radical when compared to option D. C is slightly radical. So option C is rejected. Option D will be the correct answer. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. Question 32 based on the same passage. With reference to the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. Higher education is a constantly evolving subject that needs to align towards new developments in all spheres of society. This is correct because here they tell us the new demands of society and the future of work. Okay, so statement 1 is true. Statement 2, in our country sufficient funds are not allocated for promoting higher education. No. Again, in here we rejected option A because it says that we do not have resources, so we reject it. For the same reason we can reject this one because it says we do not have sufficient funds. The passage does not talk about funds and resources. It only talks about the style and the methodology of teaching and learning. So statement 1 is true, but statement 2 is not a valid assumption. So our answer will be option A, 1 only. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. Question 33. If there is inequality in the pattern of population growth, there is greater inequality in food production and utilization. So it talks about inequality in food production and utilization. Okay, inequality in population growth, it is a mere stepping stone to make this point actually. Okay, as societies become wealthier, their consumption of animal product increases. Okay, so now they actually explain what they meant by the previous sentence. As a society becomes wealthy, it tends to consume more animal products. This means that, okay, one second, wealthier animal products. Okay, this means that a greater proportion of such basic foodstuffs as grains and legumes that could feed humans directly is instead being converted into feed for poultry and large farm animals. So earlier in a poor economy, what has happened? Grains and legumes would be fed directly to humans. But when a economy becomes wealthier, what they do? They will feed grains and legumes to poultry and farm animals, and then they will consume the animals. Yet this conversion of plant-based food into animal food for humans is far from efficient. So this is not an efficient way of doing things. Only 16% of the calories fed to chickens are recovered by us when we eat them. So this is not efficient at all. What the wealthy economics are doing, they are not efficient way of treating nutrients. This conversion rate goes down to 5 to 7% in large animals that are fed grain to add fat and some protein before slaughter. So what we are doing in wealthier economies is we are treating nutritious grains and legumes to animals, but when we consume those animals, the conversion rate, it is low. Had we consumed grains and legumes directly, we would have been gaining more nutrition than consuming the animals that are fed on those grains and legumes. Okay, we will answer the question now. Which one of the following statements best reflects the crux of the passage? There is an urgent need for public policy to promote the consumption of cereal-based food in wealthier countries. Now there is no urgent need, and okay, maybe. Okay, we'll keep this under consideration. I'm unable to reject it directly. Okay, we'll keep it under consideration. Animal-based food is far less efficient than plant-based food in terms of production and utilization. Yes, this is true, but we will not select it. Sorry, we will not select it until we have rejected the other ones. Plant-based protein should replace animal-based protein in our daily diets. No, the passage tells us that there is a low conversion rate when it comes to feeding animals with protein-filled vegetarian food and then consuming animals. But okay, we can take one message from the passage. Maybe yes, this might be one of the messages from the passage. Sorry, this might be one of the messages from the passage, but there is another solution to it. We can increase the conversion rate. Maybe we can use some new technology. So option C, it is not the only answer. It is not the only solution to the problem. So option C is rejected. Inequality in food production and consumption is inevitable in any fast changing society. No, this is a very dystopian kind of way. So this is rejected. What is dystopian? Kind of hopeless. It does not give any positive things about the now the passage gives us a problem, but this does not give us a solution. It tells us that the solution does not exist. So that is what I meant by dystopian way. So option D is rejected. Now we have conflict between option A and option D. Now option A, animal-based food is far less efficient than grain or plant-based food in terms of production and utilization. Yes, this is correct. Option A, there is an urgent need for a public policy to promote the consumption of cereal-based food in wealthier society. Now, they want us to find crux of the passage. What is crux? Crux is the central idea. Now, option A gives us a possible solution, but it does not give us the central idea of the passage. The central idea of the passage is there is a problem. What is the problem? Now, as some economists become wealthy, they will move from plant-based food to animal-based food, animal-based products, but it is less efficient. Now, option B gives us that idea, but option A tries to give us a solution. It does not address the problem presented in the passage. It tries to give us solution, but option B reflects the problem given in the passage. So option B will be the correct answer. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. Based on the same passage, question 34. With reference to the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. The food manufacturing and processing industries in every country should align their objectives and processes in accordance with the changing needs of the societies. If the food and manufacturing processing industry, it aligned itself with the needs of the society, that creates problems, because that is what the passage tells us. The passage tells us that as economies become wealthier, maybe people's choices differ. They move from cheaper legumes and grains to costlier non-green food. So if the manufacturing industry did that, it is not giving any solution to the problem, it is just aggravating the problem, it is making it, being part of the problem. So statement 1 can be rejected. Statement 2, wealthier sections tend to incur great loss of calories of food materials due to indirect utilization of their agriculture produce. Yes, this is what the passage exactly tells us about. So our answer will be option B, 2 only. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. Question number 41. Okay. Over the next 30 years, many countries are promising to move to net zero carbon, implying that household emissions will have to be cut to close to nothing. Okay. So over the next 30 years, many countries are promising to move to net zero carbon. So here they are talking about net zero carbon. But to do this, implying household emissions have to be cut to close to nothing. So that is the challenge here. Okay. A leading climate scientist reckons that at best half the reduction might be achieved through demand side measures such as behavioral changes by individuals and households. Now, a leading climate scientist says what? Half the reduction can be achieved through demand side measures, that is consumer side measures such as behavioral change. Now, half the reduction can be achieved through which one? Through behavioral change. Okay. And even that would require companies and governments to provide more incentives to change through supply side investments to make low carbon options cheaper and more widely available. But even if behavioral change happens among the consumers, that will not give us any benefit directly, because look here, and even that, even if the consumers' behavior changes, we need support from companies and governments. Through how? Through supply side investments. Only when supply side investment happens, there will be large scale production and there will be cheaper options available for the consumers. Only then they will be able to contribute to moving towards net zero carbon. Okay, we'll answer the question now. Which one of the following statements best reflects the central idea conveyed by the passage? Moving to net zero carbon is possible only by the reduction in household emissions? No, because it contributes only to 50% of the solution. Low carbon behavior in people can be brought about by incentivizing them. Yes, that is what they tell us here. To provide more incentives to supply side investment. Yes. Cheaper goods and services can be made available to people by using low carbon technologies. Now, the passage talks about moving towards changing the behavior of the people through incentivizing and more cheaper options, but it does not talk about technologies. It talks about production of more more cheaper option alternatives, and it earned about supply side investment, but it does not talk about technology specifically. Okay, manufacturing industries that use low carbon technologies should be provided with subsidies. Yes, this might be true, but what is the central idea? Central idea here is it is behavioral change of people that can be brought about by companies producing more cheaper option goods and governments incentivizing the supply side investment. So that is the central idea. But this might be true. Option D might be true, but it is not the central idea. It is a peripheral idea. So D is rejected. Option B, that will be our answer. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. Question 42. Okay. Now, with reference to the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. Supply side investments in companies can result in lower carbon behavior in people. Yes, that is what they tell. Where here? Even that would require, what would require? Even the behavioral change would require more incentives. Yes, more incentives and more incentive and supply side investment. So this is correct, valid assumption. People are not capable of adapting carbon behavior without the involvement of government and companies. Now, what is low carbon behavior? Low carbon behavior, that the behavioral change that will contribute later to net zero carbon. Now, This seems wrong. This seems wrong, but it is actually correct. I will tell you how. A leading climate scientist reckons that half the reduction might be achieved through demand side measures, that is consumer side behavioral change, such as behavioral change by individuals and households. Yes. So half of the solution can be given by behavioral change. Yes, but and even that would require companies and governments to provide incentives. So it means that even for their behavioral change to happen, governments and companies need to do something. What do they need to do? They need to give incentives and these things. Companies and governments, through them incentives should be given and supply side investment should happen. Only then behavioral change can take place. So for that reason, second solution, even though it seems not correct, it is actually true because of the words even that. Okay. So our answer will be option C, both 1 and 2. Okay. We'll go to the next question now. Question 43. Okay. In only 50 years, the world's consumption of raw materials has nearly quadrupled to more than 100 billion tons. Okay. So what has happened? Consumption of raw materials, it has grown. Okay. Less than 9% of this is reused. Okay. So there is very low reusage. Batteries of old vehicles contain materials such as lithium, cobalt, manganese and nickel that are pricey and can be hard to obtain. Now, they talk about batteries of old vehicles. They contain some materials which are pricey and hard to obtain. Supply chains are long and complicated. So, supply chains are long and complicated. Okay. What are long and complicated? Obtaining them through supply chain is hard and complicated. Buyers' risks are being aggravated by their suppliers' poor environmental and labor standards. So even if buyers want to obtain these materials through maybe some green channel, it is not supported by suppliers' poor environmental and labor standards. Reusing materials makes sense. So because the materials are pricey, they are hard to obtain and the supply chains are long and complicated, reusing, it actually makes sense. Reusing makes sense. Once batteries reach the end of their lives, they should go back to a factory where their ingredients can be recovered and put into new batteries. So here they talk about reusing of the materials required to manufacture batteries. Okay. They should go back to ingredients recovered. Okay. Now we'll answer the question. Which one of the following statements best reflects the most logical, rational and pragmatic message conveyed by the passage? So, message. Green economy is not possible without you reusing critical minerals. Okay. But this is too extreme. Green economy is not possible without reusing critical minerals. It is too extreme. We will consider it anyway. Every sector of economy should adapt the reuse of materials, resources immediately. Okay, maybe. Circular economy can be beneficial for sustainable growth. Yes, this also looks correct. Circular use of material resources is the only option for industries for their survival. The only option for their survival? No. This is too extreme. D is rejected. So we have a conflict between three options. Let us see now. Green economy is not possible without critical minerals. Again, not possible without. This is also an extreme option. So option A, we can reject it. Every sector of economy should adapt the reuse of materials, so material resources immediately. Okay, maybe the word immediately it puts it off slightly, option B, but it does not give us enough reason to reject it. Look at option C. Circular economy can be beneficial for sustainable growth. This is very valid and rational thing to say. Option B, every sector of economy should adapt the reuse of material resources immediately. Maybe in some of the sectors it is not possible. They tell us every sector and immediately. This is not so rational thing to say. So option B, we can reject it. Option C, it is very rational, very well balanced. So option C, we can say that it is the correct answer. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. Question 44. With reference to the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. Automobile industries are the examples of circular economy. Yes, they talk about batteries. So when they talk about batteries, they are talking about automobile factories being an example for circular economy. Yes, statement 1 is valid assumption. Statement 2, economic growth is compatible with circular use of mineral resources. Yes, here they tell us reusing materials makes sense. So when they tell us reusing materials makes sense, because some materials are pricey and hard to obtain and some supply chains are complicated, they tell us that economic growth is compatible with reuse of mineral resources. So both of the statements, they are very valid assumptions. So our answer will be option C, both 1 and 2. Okay, we'll go further. Question 51. It is hard to predict how changes in the climate and the atmosphere's chemistry will affect the prevalence and virulence of agricultural diseases. So they talk about agricultural diseases and climate change. Okay, so they tell us that when climate change happens, we do not know how it will affect the virulence and prevalence of agricultural diseases. But there is a risk that such changes will make some plant infections more common in all climatic zones, perhaps catastrophically so. So what they tell us is there is a risk of what happening. There is a risk that such changes will make plant infections more common in all climate zones. Okay. Part of the problem is that centuries of selective breeding have refined the genomes of most high yield crops. So we have done selective breeding and that poses a problem in this context. They are spectacular at growing in today's conditions, but genetic variations that are not immediately useful to them have been bred out. So we have selectively bred crops in such a way that they are most suitable to today's climate, but if the climate changes slightly, they might find it difficult to adapt, because we have selected those breeds that are spectacular at growing in today's conditions, but we have bred out some variations which would help them adapt. Okay, so genetic variations have been bred out. This is good for yields but bad for coping with changes. Yes, today they will grow very well, but if the climate changes, they might not do so well. A minor disease or even an unknown one could suddenly rampage through a genetically honed crop. So this might pose a challenge. Okay, which one of the following statements best reflects the central idea conveyed by the passage? Global climate change adversely affect the productivity of crops. Okay, this talks about crops but not productivity of crops. Okay, still we'll consider it. We'll keep it under consideration. Our total dependence on genetically honed crops entails possible food security. Yes, this is what they tell us actually. Our food security should not depend on agricultural productivity alone. No, this is not the idea that is being presented in the passage. Statement D. Genetically honed crops should be replaced with their wild varieties in our present cultivation practices. No, this is a bit radical thing to say. If we did it, we again we would face with a problem. Our productivity would be hit rapidly if we replaced our crops with wild varieties directly. Okay, statement 1 and B, A and B, we have conflict between them. Global climate change adversely affect the productivity of crops. Yes. Our total dependence on genetically honed crops entails possible food security. This is also yes. Now option A, it talks about it talks about productivity of crops, not the survival of crops or not about our food security. One, and then it does not talk about genetically modified crops. So it does not address that issue. So option A can be rejected. Option B, that will be the correct answer. Okay, it only talks about climate change, but it does not talk about the the selective breeding that we have done over the centuries. Okay, so option A can be rejected. Okay, we'll go to the next question. Question 52. With reference to the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. Global climate change can result in the migration of several plant diseases to new areas. Yes. How? Because they tell us here, the plant infections can become more common in all climatic zones. It means that there can be migration of diseases. When they say that it can take over in all the places, they mean that they can migrate, the diseases can migrate. Yes, statement 1 is valid assumption. Statement 2, scientific understanding of the wild relatives of our present crops would enable us to strengthen food security. Yes, because when the author talks so much about this thing that we have selectively bred in only selective kind of genomes such that they will give us high productivity, and we have ignored those ones, we have bred out those genomes which would have been better at adapting and which would have been better at survival. He specifically means that we need to study them so that we can improve our crops. So both of them, they are valid assumptions. So our answer will be option C, both 1 and 2. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. Question 53. A good statesman, like any other sensible human being, learns from his opponents than from his fervent supporters. So now this talks about statesman learning from his opponents rather than from his supporters. For his supporters will push him to disaster unless his opponents show him where the dangers are. So if a statesman depended only on his supporters, they would eventually push him to some disaster. But his opponents, they will do what? They will show him the dangers. Through their criticism, they will show him the dangers before he falls into disasters. Okay. So if he is wise, he will often pray to be delivered from his friends because they will ruin him. Here the word deliver, it means to be relieved from his friends. The passage only tells us that a proper statesman, he needs to pay attention to his opponents rather than clinging to the opinion of his friends alone, because his friends, they would give favorable opinion to him always. Okay, but though it hurts, he ought always to pray never to be left without opponents, for they keep him on the path of reason and good sense. So opponents will give him reason and good sense. The national unity of free people depends upon a sufficiently even balance of political power to make it impractical for the administration to be arbitrary and for the opposition to be revolutionary and irreconcilable. Now, when it says the national unity of free people depends on a sufficiently even balance of political power, what it says is, it says that, for example, in a democracy, the leaders of the governing party and the leaders of the opposition party, there must be some level of consensus between them. That is what it says. The national unity of free people depends on a sufficiently even balance between political power. And what it will ensure is, it will ensure that the administration is not arbitrary, and it will ensure that the opposition is not revolutionary. Administration, the ruling party, it should not be arbitrary, ruling party or ruling side, and the opposition side, it should not be revolutionary. When will that happen? It happens only when the top leaders of both the sides, they have at least some level of consensus between them. Okay, so the statement talks about what? It talks about some level of agreement or at least acceptance of the other side in political environment, in democratic environment. Okay, look at the options. Which one of the following statements best reflects the critical message conveyed by the author of the passage? Without opposition parties, the administration in the democracy gets to become more responsible. No. This if anything else, the passage tells that administration will become more irresponsible. So this actually negates what the passage is telling. Option A is rejected. Democracy needs to have revolutionary in opposition. No. The passage tells opposition should not be revolutionary and administration should not be arbitrary. But this tells us that opposition should be revolutionary, so rejected. Rulers in a democracy need the support of opposition for their political survival. No, the passage does not talk about the political survivor of the statesman. It talks about being good to the country. So option C is rejected. In a democracy, the opposition is indispensable for the balance of political power and good governance. Yes, this is what the passage tells us. There should be a balance of power between differing opinions. When the two sides of political side, they have differing opinions, even then if there is balance, it is good for democracy. So option D is very rational, and that is what is said in the passage. Okay, so that is our correct answer. Question 54. Okay. Again, assumptions. In a democracy, a strong opposition is required only if the head of the government is indifferent. No. Only if, no. Okay. The more aggressive the opposition, the better is the governance in a democracy. This might seem true, but it is not true. Why? Because the more aggressive the opposition, the better the governance. It means that we want the opposition to be almost radical or revolutionary. But the passage tells us that opposition should not be revolutionary, and it should not be irreconcilable. See here. It should not be irreconcilable. So opposition should be opposing the governing body, but it should not be severely aggressive. It should be doing it with a healthy and good intention, not for the sake of opposing. Okay. So both of them, they are invalid assumptions. So the answer will be option D, neither one nor two. Okay. Question 61. Okay. There has been no democracy that has grown economically without corporate capitalism. So this talks about democracy and corporate capitalism. It helps in modernizing the economy and enabling the transition from rural to urban and agriculture to industry and services, which are inevitable with growth. So how does corporate capitalism help democracy? Because it helps in modernizing the economy and it helps in transition. Question number 61. There has been no democracy that has grown economically without corporate capitalism. Okay, so they are telling us that corporate capitalism is good for democracy. Okay, it is very good for democracy. It helps in modernizing the economy and enabling the transition from rural to urban and agriculture to industry and services, which are inevitable for growth. Okay. Now they give us two benefits of corporate capitalism. One is modernizing and the other is transition. It generates jobs. What generates jobs? Corporate capitalism generates jobs. There is no other ways to fix a country's unemployment challenge without a further impetus to private business. Okay. So for job, the best thing that the government can do is give impetus to private businesses. Big companies can operate on a large scale and become competitive both domestically and externally. No, they tell us that just because there are big companies, we cannot say that they create a monopoly. If there are two or more big companies, they will create competition among themselves, both domestically as well as externally. Okay, we will underline competitive. A vibrant corporate capitalist base also leads to additional revenues for the state. So this is an added benefit to the state, which in turn can be used for greater welfare for the marginalized, and okay, we can create welfare and creating a more level playing field in terms of opportunities. Okay, so the passage tells us that corporate capitalism is very good for democracy because it helps in modernizing the economy, it helps in transition of the economy, then it creates jobs and giving impetus to the impetus to the private business. It is the best method to create jobs. Then large companies, they will create competition among themselves, and capitalism will generate revenue for the state, and this revenue can be used for welfare activities. Because of the welfare activities, indirectly a level playing field will be created. Okay, this is the entire gist of the passage. Based on that, let us take a look at the question. Which one of the following statements best reflects the critical message conveyed by the author of the passage? Corporate capitalism is important for economic growth of a state, also democracy. Yes, very good option. but we will keep it under consideration unless we have rejected all the rest. Corporate capitalism is imperative for modern state to achieve its political objectives. No. The passage does not talk about political objectives of the state. It only talks about economy and welfare. Okay. Statement C. No state can ensure its economic survival for long without the role of corporate capitalism. Now, no state, this is a bit extreme things to say. So, still we will keep it under consideration. Corporate capitalism and democracy have mutual dependence for their continued existence. No. The passage tells us that corporate capitalism is beneficial for democracy, but it does not tell us that democracy is dependent on, it does not tell us that corporate capitalism is dependent on democracy. In fact, democracy can be dependent on corporate capitalism for growth and economic growth and welfare. But corporate capitalism, it is not dependent on democracy. It is just it can have its own growth. If the state gives it impetus, it is beneficial, but it does not say that it is dependent on this one. So we will reject option D. Now A and C. Corporate capitalism is important for economic growth of a state and for democracy. Yes. No state can ensure its economic survival. No. This is too stretch of an argument. So statement C, we can reject it. Option A will be the correct answer. Okay. We'll go to the next question now. Question 62. Again they are talking about assumptions here. Corporate capitalism promotes the growth of labor force and provides more employment opportunities. Yes, they tell us that specifically because they tell us that corporate capitalism is the best source for jobs. Okay. Poor and marginalized sections of population are benefited by corporate capitalism due to trickle-down effect. This is also true. Where is this trickle-down effect referred? Here. Giving impetus to private businesses. It generates jobs and there is no other way to fix a country's unemployment challenge without a further impetus to private business. It means that if you give benefits to the big corporates, they will pass on the benefits down the line. So that is what trickle-down effect actually is. So both of them, they are valid assumptions. So our answer will be option C, both 1 and 2. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. 63. This is a very small passage. A network of voluntary associations stands as a buffer between the relatively powerless individual and potentially powerful state. Which one of the following statements best reflects the best explanation of the passage? So they have given us the statement here and they want us to see which one of these options will explain this statement given. Okay. It emphasizes the inability of the state to enforce its will in practice against the opposition of certain groups within it. Okay. Before answering this, let us take a read at the statement again. A network of voluntary associations. So they are talking about some network of voluntary associations which acts as a buffer between individual, and individual is powerless, and state is powerful. It emphasizes the inability of the state to enforce its will. Now option A is talking about state as though it is weak, but the statement talks about state as powerful. So option A is rejected. Option B. It is a cooperative organization for the promotion of the well-being and development of the personality of its members. Now personality of its members, okay, but it does not talk about this thing. It does not talk about a common endeavor, or it does not talk about some option B. It is a cooperative organization for the promotion of the well-being and development of the personality of its members. Okay. This network of voluntary associations, it might be some cooperative organization. Yes, this seems not so valid, but not so invalid also. We'll keep it under consideration. Statement C. It takes individual out of a state of isolation and gives them a chance to participate in common endeavor. Maybe. It permits citizens to have variety of loyalties and allegiances. Okay. No, there is no talk about loyalty and allegiance. Now, this sentence, it talks about some network of voluntary associations which acts as buffer between a powerless individual and a powerful state. So it means that it takes an individual to towards a higher goal through collective force. Okay. Now, which of these two statements expresses that feeling? It is a cooperative organization for the promotion of well-being and development of personality of its members. So here the key thing is personality, individual personality. But here it takes individuals out of a state of isolation and gives them a chance to participate in common endeavor. This one seems more relevant, because if an individual is to deal with the state through some buffer, it means that he is acting towards some common endeavor. So what is an endeavor? Endeavor is some common target, common goal. So option C seems more relevant to describe this network of voluntary associations that the passage is referring to. Okay. So option B can be rejected, and option C will be seems to be the most appropriate option. Now this passage, it is not very expressive in its nature. We just need to understand that they are referring to some network of voluntary associations, and we need to select that sentence which explains the given statement more appropriately. So, and option A, B and D, they are less appropriate when compared to option C. So we will mark that one as our answer. So that is the correct answer actually. Okay. Option C. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. 64. Actually, this is a question on mathematics, quantitative aptitude. It has been wrongly put in here. Anyway, we will answer the question. Okay. There exists a natural number which, when increased by 50%, can have its number of factors unchanged, and then there exists a natural number which, when increased by 150%, can have its number of factors unchanged. Okay. Now, what does the question say? There exists a natural number which, when increased by 50%, can have its number of factors unchanged. Can you think of any number which, if you increase by 50%, can have its number of factors unchanged? Yes. Which is that? The number is 2. If you increase 2 by 50%, what number do you get? We get 3. How many factors does 2 have? 2 factors. 1 and 2 itself. Okay. How many factors does 3 have? 3 also has 2 factors. 1 and 3 itself. So statement 1 is true. What about statement 2? There exists a natural number which, when increased by 150%, can have its number of factors unchanged. Can we think of such number? Yes, again 2. What do you get if you increase 2 by 150%? We get 5. 2 also has 2 factors. 5 also has 2 factors. So both the statements, they are true. So the answer will be option C, both 1 and 2. Okay. Question 71. A single number of inflation is an aggregate across different commodities and services. Okay. The price rise differs for different items of consumption. No. So what this statement tells us is, inflation is an aggregate of different commodities and services. Because what is an aggregate? Like an average. It is an aggregate of the inflation number, it does not represent the rise in price of individual items. It gives an aggregate of rise in price in among all the different commodities and services. Okay. So the single number is arrived at by assigning weights to different commodities and services. So they do not take all the services and commodities at a time and they just take a simple average. They take weighted average of it. That is, they will give different weights to different commodities and services. Okay. For WPI, that is wholesale price index, the weights in production are used. Okay. For CPI, the consumption basket is used. So when it comes to whole WPI, they use what? They use weights in production. When it comes to CPI, they use consumption basket. Okay. Consumption basket is a total sum of what a typical and average consumer consumes. Okay. But people are not homogeneous. The consumption basket is vastly different for the poor, the middle class and the rich. So this consumption basket, it is not homogeneous, it is vastly different. Okay. Hence the CPI is different for each of these classes, and a composite index requiring the averaging of the baskets. So to give, if you take a CPA, common CPA for all the classes, it is not so appropriate. So what we can do is, we can take a composite index averaging the consumption basket of different classes. Okay, so this passage, it talks about how the number that we give for inflation, it is not really reflective of the ground reality. So it says that we need to do some averaging and giving weights to different classes and different commodities. Okay, now let us take a look at the question. Which one of the following statements best reflects the message conveyed by the passage? Logical, rational and crucial. Message conveyed by the passage. Okay, we must use WPI exclusively for measuring price rise and CPI should be done away with. No, again this phrase done away with, it means completely avoid or reject. So this passage, it is not completely rejecting CPI. It asks us to rely on some composite index through averaging the baskets. Okay, it does not completely reject CPI, so we can reject option A. Option B, the present calculation of the inflation rate does not correctly measure price rise of individual item commodity. Yes, this is said in the first sentence itself. Option C, inflation data underrepresents services in consumption basket. No, it does not. The passage does not differentiate between services and manufacturing industries or services and commodities. It tells us that we need to give different weights to different this thing, but it does not specifically say that it underrepresents services, or it does not say that it overrepresents commodities. That is not what the passage tells. So we can reject option C. Look at option D. Knowledge of inflation rate is not really of any use to anybody in the country. Any use to anybody. No, that is too radical thing to say. So that is not our answer. So our answer will be option B. Option B is the most logical message that the passage actually gives us. Okay, we'll answer one more question. Okay, I think this was the last passage question as per set A. Which one of the following statements best reflects the crux of the passage? The same passage. Okay, question 72. Trust stands commonly defined as being vulnerable to others. So this is a philosophical passage. It talks that trust is nothing but being vulnerable to others. Entrepreneurship implies trust in others and willingness to expose oneself to betrayal. Now they connect entrepreneurship to trust in others, and an entrepreneur, what he does is he exposes himself to betrayal. Trust in expert systems is the essence of globalizing behavior. Trust itself emerges as super commodity in the social market and defines the characteristics of goods and services in a global market. Now they talk about trust in expert systems. It does what? It globalizes behavior. Okay, and then trust is a super commodity in social market, and it defines the characteristics of goods and services. Now they talk about what? They talk about the economic benefit of trust. Okay, trusting conduct also means holding others in good esteem and an optimism that they are or will be competent in certain respects. Okay, they talk about trusting conduct. Okay, this is esteem and optimism about someone's competency. Okay, so they talk about trust, vulnerability, entrepreneurship, then trust itself being a super commodity, and trusting behavior or trusting conduct. Okay, done. So based on this, we shall take a look at the question. This was completely philosophical in nature. Okay, which one of the following best reflects the crux of the passage? What is crux? Crux is the central idea. Okay, option A, trustworthiness cannot be expected in entrepreneurship. No, it says that an entrepreneur is an embodiment of trust in others. So statement A is rejected. Statement 2, trustworthy people are the most vulnerable people. This might be true, but most vulnerable we do not know. So we'll keep it under consideration. Statement C, no economic activity is possible without being exposed to betrayal. Yes, this is okay, but again, no economic possibility. This is superlative. Most. No is also very superlative. So both of them, they are fine, but we will keep them under consideration. Trust is important though it entails risk. Yes, this is what the passage tells us. It tells about good qualities of trust, also the risks of being trustworthy. So this is a very rational, and this is the thing that actually the passage tells us from beginning to end. So we can reject these two options. Option D is the correct answer. Okay, so this completes the complete analysis and of answers and solutions to the CSAT paper of 25 year. And as I said, this year's paper, it was a bit difficult. Now, reasoning section, they were moderately okay. They were on the expected lines. Mathematics sections, they were on the expected lines, but the level of difficulty was upped by just a bit, quite a level. So they were not different from the trend that was being followed in the last 2 to 3 years. They followed the trend, but they went one step ahead. But when it came to reading comprehension, actually they have changed the pattern slightly. They have, most of the questions, they were in our previous in our previous years, there were some questions there were some passages which had only one question, but here they were very rare. Only the last 2-3 questions, there was only one question for one passage. For the rest of them, all of them were, each of the passages, it had 2 questions, and assumptions were asked most in most common. So, and as I said, they have changed the pattern actually in this paper when it comes to reading comprehension. Earlier, the correct option to the question, it was taken verbatim from the original passage, original article, but here they have changed the wordings. So that makes it very difficult. Overall, the paper was not so easy at all, especially reading comprehension. It was really tough. Okay. Okay, I hope that you found this session helpful. Use this to prepare. Use these classes to enhance your preparation for next year. Thank you. All the best.